Step back. People like you slow down real buyers. The sentence didn't echo. It cut, clean and deliberate, slicing through the quiet hum of the luxury storefront like it had been practiced. Danielle Carter didn't move. She stood just outside the glass doors, hands relaxed at her sides, her reflection faintly merging with the polished surface as customers in tailored coats and designer heels passed behind it without hesitation. Inside, the lighting was warm, curated, almost theatrical. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, like a boundary had been drawn without ever being written. The security guard shifted his stance half a step closer, not touching her, but close enough to make the message clear. The manager, a tall white man with a perfectly knotted tie and a smile that never reached his eyes, watched from just inside the entrance, arms folded like he was guarding something valuable from someone he had already decided didn't qualify. Danielle's gaze moved slowly, not toward them, but across the store itself, the layout, the foot traffic, the subtle inefficiencies hidden beneath polished surfaces. She took it all in the way someone doesn't just look, but evaluates. The kind of stillness she carried wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. A woman brushed past her shoulder on the way in, pausing just long enough to glance back with a flicker of curiosity, then continued inside without question. No one asked her to wait. No one stopped her. Danielle noticed. She always noticed. Store policy. The manager added, his tone lighter now, as if dressing the moment in something more acceptable, more neutral. But the words hung wrong. Policies don't stare people down. Policies don't smirk. Danielle finally turned her head, meeting his eyes for the first time, and there was no anger there. No frustration. Just something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Recognition. Like she had seen this scene before, in a different city, under different lights, with different faces that all blurred into the same expression. For a brief second, the noise around her faded. The muted conversations, the distant register chime, the soft shuffle of expensive shoes on polished floors, and she was somewhere else. Younger, standing in front of another door, hearing a different voice say the same thing in a different way. Not today. Not you. That memory didn't weigh her down. It sharpened her. Danielle exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that resets everything, and reached into her coat. Not for anything flashy, not for proof, but for her phone. The guard tensed slightly, watching. The manager tilted his head, curious now, like he was waiting for her to argue, to plead, to prove him right. But Danielle didn't do any of that. She tapped once, then again. Her voice, when it came, was low, calm, almost conversational. I'm outside the Fifth Avenue location, she said. A pause. Then, yes, I see everything I need. Inside the store, nothing had changed yet. Customers still browsed. Staff still smiled. The manager still stood there, confident in a moment he believed he controlled. But something invisible had already shifted, like a current running just beneath the surface. Danielle lowered the phone slightly, her eyes returning to the glass, to the reflection of a place that thought it understood value. Interesting, she murmured, almost to herself, as if the conclusion had already been reached and everything after this was just confirmation. And somewhere, far beyond that door, something had just begun to move. The door opened again, but not for her. A couple stepped in laughing, their voices light, welcomed instantly by a sales associate whose smile stretched wide and effortless. Danielle watched the exchange without turning her head, her eyes catching the small details most people missed, the immediate shift in posture, the warmth that appeared on command, the subtle nod of approval that seemed reserved for a certain kind of presence. The difference was not loud. It never was. It lived in seconds, in glances, in who was invited forward and who was quietly held back. Behind the glass, the manager leaned toward a staff member and said something under his breath. The associate glanced toward Danielle, then quickly looked away, as if acknowledging her too long might blur the line that had just been drawn. The guard exhaled, adjusting his jacket, his tone. Softer now, but still firm as he spoke again. Ma'am, I am just doing my job. Danielle nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. That phrase had followed her for years. It was always someone just doing their job, someone following protocol, someone protecting a space that was never written to include her. She shifted her weight slightly, heels steady against the pavement, and glanced up at the store sign, letting her eyes trace the brand name like she was reading something deeper than letters. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. A message. She did not rush to read it. Timing mattered. Inside, a young woman near the display table hesitated, watching Danielle through the glass longer than the others had. There was something different in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even discomfort. She whispered something to a colleague, who responded with a quick shake of the head, like the situation had already been decided and did not need revisiting. Danielle saw that too. The moment before someone chooses silence. The moment where truth almost steps forward but does not. The manager straightened, noticing the subtle shift in attention, and stepped closer to the entrance again, reinforcing his presence like a wall that did not need to speak to be understood. "We have a standard here," he said, louder this time, not just to Danielle but to anyone within earshot, shaping the narrative before it could shift. Danielle finally lowered her gaze to her phone and unlocked it, her reflection briefly disappearing from the glass as her focus narrowed. A new message appeared, concise, precise. "Acquisition status, pending review. Board notified." She read it once, then again, not because she needed to, but because it confirmed something she had already known before she even stepped onto the sidewalk. This was never about a purchase. It was about a pattern. She lifted her eyes again, meeting the manager's stare, and for the first time, something in his expression flickered. Not fear. Not yet. But curiosity edged with something else. Doubt. Danielle slipped her phone back into her coat, her voice calm, almost conversational as she spoke, not loud, but clear enough to carry through the small space between them. "How long have you been managing this location?" The question landed differently than anything else she had said. It was not defensive. It was not emotional. It was precise. The manager blinked, caught off guard, then let out a short laugh like he had regained control. "Long enough," he replied, dismissive, confident, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. Danielle tilted her head slightly, as if noting the answer for later, her expression unchanged, her presence still anchored in place, not as someone waiting to be let in, but as someone deciding exactly what would happen next. The question did not disappear after he answered it. It lingered in the air, stretching thin across the polished entrance like something waiting to be understood. Danielle did not respond right away. She simply watched him, the way someone watches a number settle into place before making a decision. Inside, the rhythm of the store continued, but it was no longer smooth. A sales associate missed a greeting. A customer paused mid-step, glancing toward the door with quiet curiosity. That young woman near the display table shifted again, this time taking a step closer to the glass, her brows tightening as if something about the moment no longer made sense. Danielle noticed the shift, the subtle cracks that begin before anything fully breaks. Her phone buzzed again, softer this time, like a signal rather than an interruption. She did not look at it immediately. Instead, she took one step forward, closing the distance just enough that her reflection aligned perfectly with the manager's figure inside. Two silhouettes, separated by glass, but not by awareness. "Long enough to understand your numbers, I assume," she said, her tone even, almost analytical. The manager's smile tightened slightly, not gone, but no longer as effortless. "Our numbers are strong," he replied quickly, a touch too quickly, like the answer had been rehearsed but not questioned. Danielle nodded once, absorbing it, filing it away. "Foot traffic looks steady," she continued, her eyes scanning past him. "But conversion seems inconsistent." The words did not sound like a customer speaking. They sounded like an audit. The manager blinked, just once, but it was enough. Behind him, the young associate who had been watching earlier took another step forward, now close enough to hear every word clearly. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to speak, then stopped herself again. The guard shifted, his earlier confidence softening into uncertainty, his eyes moving between Danielle and the manager like he was trying to understand where the authority in the moment actually lived. Danielle finally glanced down at her phone. The message was clear. "Acquisition status, approved for escalation. Executive review complete." She read it without expression, then locked the screen, her reflection returning to the glass like nothing had changed. But everything had. Inside, the manager straightened again, trying to reclaim control of a situation he could no longer fully read. "Ma'am, If you are not planning to make a purchase, I will have to ask you to move along, he said, his tone firmer now, louder, as if volume could restore certainty. A few customers turned at that, their attention no longer subtle. The moment had become visible. Danielle lifted her gaze slowly, meeting his eyes with a calm that did not challenge him, but completely dismissed the authority he believed he held. I am planning something, she said quietly. The words were simple, but they landed with weight, like a door about to open that no one inside was prepared for. The young associate inside took one more step forward, this time not stopping, her voice barely above a whisper, but audible enough. I think we should check her name, she said to the manager, uncertainty breaking through her earlier silence. The manager did not turn to her. He kept his eyes locked on Danielle, unwilling to shift, unwilling to question the line he had already drawn. That will not be necessary, he replied, dismissive, but the confidence was no longer complete. Danielle watched that exchange without moving, her expression unchanged, but her presence heavier now, like the moment itself had chosen a direction. She slipped her phone back into her coat once more, her shoulders relaxed, her posture steady, not waiting, not asking, just allowing the next step to unfold exactly as she had already set it in motion. The air shifted before anyone spoke again. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the moment before a storm when everything feels too still. Danielle did not move, but inside the store, something had started to unravel. The young associate who had questioned the manager's decision now stood frozen halfway between the display table and the entrance, her eyes flicking between Danielle and the man beside her, as if she was watching two different versions of reality collide. The manager sensed it too. Not the truth, not yet, but the loss of control. It showed in the way he adjusted his stance, in the slight tightening of his jaw, in the way his voice rose just a fraction higher when he spoke again. We are not going to entertain this, he said, louder now, not just for Danielle, but for everyone within earshot. It was no longer about policy. It was about authority, about drawing a line and forcing everyone else to see it the same way he did. A couple near the back slowed their browsing, their conversation fading into quiet observation. Another customer near the register leaned slightly to get a better view, curiosity replacing comfort. Moments like this did not stay private for long. Danielle let the silence stretch just a second longer than expected, then tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, almost reflective. You are right, she said. You are not entertaining anything. The words landed differently than before. Not defensive, not reactive. Final. The manager frowned, just briefly, as if trying to place the meaning behind them. Danielle's gaze moved past him again, scanning the store with the same quiet precision, noting the spacing between displays, the uneven flow of customers, the subtle tension now visible in every employee's posture. She saw the associate near the register miss a greeting. She saw another glance toward the manager, waiting for instruction that never came. She saw hesitation spreading like a ripple through water that had once been still. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she did not ignore it. She pulled it out. Slowly, her movements deliberate, controlled. The guard watched closely now, not with suspicion, but with uncertainty. Danielle read the message, her eyes steady, her expression unchanged. Executive channel open. Board members connected. Live review in progress. She held the screen for just a second longer, then lowered it, her gaze lifting back to the manager. For the first time, she stepped forward again, close enough that the space between them felt intentional, not accidental. The glass door remained closed, but the distance had vanished. You said you have a standard, she said quietly. I am curious who defined it. The question did not challenge him. It exposed him. The manager opened his mouth, ready with another answer, another line, another defense, but something held him back. Maybe it was the silence behind Danielle's words. Maybe it was the way the entire store seemed to be listening now. Or maybe it was the first flicker of doubt that had finally found its way in. Behind him, the young associate took a breath, then spoke again, louder this time, her voice steadier. Sir, we really should verify her information. The words did not echo, but they carried. The manager turned slightly, irritation flashing across his face, but it was too late. The moment had shifted. Danielle did not look at the associate. She did not need to. She had already seen this pattern before. The hesitation, the courage, the line where someone decides whether to stay silent or stepped forward. She returned her attention to the manager, her expression calm, but her presence unmistakably heavier now, like the weight of something inevitable pressing closer with every passing second. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Check." The word check did not move him right away. It hung there, heavier than expected, as if it carried consequences he had not fully considered. The manager hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for everyone watching to notice. Inside the store, the energy shifted again, no longer subtle, no longer contained. The young associate stepped forward without waiting for permission this time, her hands slightly tense as she reached for the tablet at the counter. She glanced once at the manager, then at Danielle, as if silently asking which version of the moment she should believe. Danielle gave no signal. She did not nod. She did not speak. She simply stood there, steady, allowing the truth to arrive on its own terms. The associate turned the tablet toward herself, fingers moving quickly now, searching, typing, verifying. The screen reflected faintly in the glass, unreadable to anyone outside, but the tension inside the store made it feel like everyone could see exactly what was happening. The manager shifted his weight, stepping closer as if to regain control of the process. "That is not necessary," he repeated, but his voice had changed. It no longer carried certainty. It carried resistance. The associate did not stop. "It will only take a second," she replied, her voice quieter but firm, the kind of tone that comes from knowing something is already wrong. A customer near the entrance leaned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen. Another pulled out a phone, not to record, but to check something, perhaps the brand, perhaps the moment, perhaps the feeling that something important was unfolding in real time. Danielle watched it all without reacting, her calm now standing in contrast to the rising unease around her. She had seen this phase before. The moment where denial starts to crack, where certainty begins to slip, where the truth approaches slowly but cannot be stopped. The associate's fingers paused, just for a second. Then she scrolled. Her eyes widened, not dramatically, not exaggerated, but enough. Enough for the shift to be visible. Enough for the silence to deepen. The manager noticed it immediately. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharper now, tension cutting through the last layer of composure he had left. The associate did not answer right away. She looked at the screen again, then back at Danielle, then back at the screen, as if confirming something she did not expect to find. "Sir," she began, her voice catching slightly before steadying. "There is an executive access flag on this profile." The words landed like a ripple through the room. Not loud, not explosive, but undeniable. The manager frowned, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing as he reached for the tablet. "That does not mean anything," he said quickly, almost reflexively, as if dismissing it fast enough could make it irrelevant. But the associate did not let go of the device right away. "It is not just a flag," she added, her voice lower now, more certain. "It is marked for ownership review." The phrase hung in the air, heavier than anything that had been said before. Danielle remained still, her expression unchanged, but her presence now filled the space in a way it had not moments ago. The guard straightened slightly, his posture no longer defensive, but uncertain, as if the role he thought he was playing no longer made sense. The customers inside were no longer pretending not to watch. Every glance, every movement, every breath seemed aligned with the unfolding realization that something had shifted beyond correction. The manager took the tablet from the associate, his eyes scanning quickly, then again, slower this time, as if trying to force the information into something that matched what he believed. But it did not match. It could not match. And for the first time since Danielle stepped onto the sidewalk, his silence said more than anything he had spoken. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured, piece by piece, like something carefully constructed beginning to collapse under its own weight. The manager stared at the screen longer than necessary, his eyes moving slower now, rereading lines that refused to change no matter how many times he scanned them. The confidence that once sat so comfortably on his shoulders had shifted, replaced by something far less stable. Around him, the store no longer felt controlled. It felt observed. The young associate stepped back slightly, her hands lowering as if she had just handed off more than a device. She had handed off truth. A customer near the entrance leaned in just enough to catch the manager's expression, then glanced at Danielle, the connection forming quietly, but unmistakably. Danielle did not move. She did not rush the moment. She let it stretch, let it settle, let it reveal exactly what it needed to reveal. The manager finally looked up, his gaze meeting hers again, but this time it was different. The certainty was gone. In its place was calculation, the kind that comes too late, when the outcome is already unfolding beyond control. "This does not change anything," he said, but the words lacked foundation. They floated, unsupported, like something spoken out of habit rather than belief. Danielle tilted her head slightly, not dismissing him, not correcting him, simply acknowledging the statement as incomplete. "It changes everything," she replied, her voice still calm, still measured, but now carrying a weight that settled across the entire room. The guard shifted again, stepping back half a step without realizing it, as if instinct had begun to override instruction. Inside, the young associate glanced at another employee, then back at the manager, her earlier hesitation replaced by something clearer. Awareness. The customers were no longer pretending. Phones were out now, not raised high, but present, ready, documenting in quiet ways that did not need to be obvious to be effective. Danielle reached into her coat once more, pulling out her phone with the same controlled motion she had used before. She did not dial. She did not hesitate. She simply pressed the screen and lifted it slightly, her voice low but precise. "You have the live feed," she said. A pause. Then, "Yes. This location." The words did not need explanation. Inside the store, the manager's eyes flickered again, this time toward the tablet, then back to Danielle, then toward the staff around him, as if trying to find solid ground in a space that had already shifted beneath him. The associate near the counter swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper, but audible enough. "Sir, there is more," she said, pointing at the screen. The manager looked down again, slower this time, as if bracing himself. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for the room to feel it. Danielle lowered the phone slightly, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. She had not raised her voice. She had not stepped inside. She had not asked for anything beyond a simple check. And yet the entire structure of the moment had begun to turn. The manager exhaled, a small sound, almost lost in the space, but it carried something new. Not authority, not control, realization. Danielle took one final step forward, stopping just at the edge of the door, her reflection now perfectly aligned with the interior, no longer separate, no longer outside in any meaningful way. "You asked me to wait," she said quietly. "So I did." She let the words settle, then added, just as calmly, "Now we are done waiting." The door did not open, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a delay. Inside, the manager's grip on the tablet tightened slightly, his eyes scanning the screen again as if repetition might somehow change the outcome. It did not. The words remained. The flags remained. The authority behind them became impossible to ignore. Around him, the staff had stopped pretending to work. Movement slowed. Conversations faded. Even the soft background music seemed out of place now, like it belonged to a different moment entirely. Danielle stood exactly where she had been, just outside the threshold, but the weight of the room had shifted toward her, pulling attention, pulling focus, pulling truth into alignment. The young associate took a cautious step closer to the manager, her voice steadier now, no longer uncertain. "Sir, the executive channel is active," she said quietly. "They are watching this location in real time." The words did not need to be loud. They carried enough on their own. The manager's head lifted slowly, his eyes moving toward the ceiling as if he could somehow see the invisible presence now connected to the moment. He could not, but he felt it. Everyone did. Danielle lowered her phone slightly, her gaze steady, her expression composed, not triumphant, not reactive, just present. "You built your decision on appearance," she said calmly. "They are building theirs on evidence." The contrast settled heavily into the space. The guard stepped back another half step, his posture no longer aligned with enforcement, but with observation. A customer near the entrance spoke under their breath, not loud enough to interrupt, but clear enough to be heard. "This is not going how he thought it would." Another nodded slightly, eyes fixed on the manager, waiting. Inside, the tablet screen shifted again. A new line appeared. "Authorization pending. Ownership escalation confirmed." The associate saw it first. Her breath caught slightly, and this time she did not hesitate. "Sir, it is escalating," she said, her voice carrying more urgency now. The manager looked down quickly, his composure slipping further as he read, then read again, slower, like the meaning might soften if he took his time. It did not. Danielle took one final step forward, close enough now that the reflection between her and the interior disappeared completely. She was no longer outside in any way that mattered. The separation had become symbolic, not real. "You asked me to leave," she said, her tone unchanged, each word measured, controlled. "But you never asked who I was." The statement did not rise in volume. It did not need to. It landed with precision, cutting through the last layer of denial that had been holding the moment together. The manager looked up again, and this time, there was no attempt to recover control, only recognition of what he had missed. Behind him, the young associate straightened, her earlier hesitation gone, replaced by clarity. "Sir, her name is in the executive ownership file," she said, louder now, for everyone to hear. The words spread through the store like a current. Customers exchanged glances. Staff shifted where they stood. The guard looked from Danielle to the manager, then back again, recalibrating everything he thought he understood just minutes ago. Danielle remained still, her presence now undeniable, not because she had raised her voice, but because the truth had arrived without needing it. The manager opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, silence was no longer his tool. It was his exposure. And just beyond that silence, something final was about to step fully into view. Time did not move forward in that moment. It folded inward. The noise of the store, the shifting feet, the quiet murmurs, all of it dimmed into something distant, like the world had stepped back to let something deeper surface. Danielle's gaze softened, not in weakness, but in memory. For a fraction of a second, the glass in front of her was no longer a storefront. It was another door, another city, another version of her standing in borrowed confidence, holding a resume that had been read before it was dismissed. She remembered the tone. Not loud, not cruel, just certain. "We are looking for a different fit." The same structure, different words, the same conclusion. She had stood there then too, still, composed, absorbing the weight of a decision made before she ever spoke. Back then, she had walked away, not defeated, not broken, just aware. Aware of the pattern, aware of the system that did not need to announce itself to function perfectly. The memory did not sting anymore. It informed. It sharpened. It built something quiet and unshakable. The present returned without warning. The glass, the manager, the staff, the watchers, the tension, all of it snapped back into place, but it no longer felt the same. Danielle's posture did not change, but something inside her had settled into clarity. This was not a confrontation. It was a conclusion. Inside the store, the manager shifted again, his earlier authority now reduced to fragments of reaction. He looked at the tablet, then at Danielle, then back at the staff around him, as if trying to gather something he had already lost. The young associate stood firm now, no longer unsure, her eyes steady, her voice silent but present. The customers had stopped pretending entirely. Their attention was no longer divided. It was fixed. Danielle inhaled slowly, a controlled breath that carried no urgency, only certainty. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than before, but it reached further. "This is not new," she said. "It just feels new to you." The words moved through the room like a realization no one could interrupt. The manager's jaw tightened, but he did not respond. He could not, because somewhere between the first instruction he gave and this moment now, the narrative had slipped out of his hands. Danielle took another small step forward, not crossing the threshold, but close enough that the distinction no longer mattered. "You thought you were protecting something," she continued, "but all you did was reveal it." The statement did not accuse. It defined. The guard lowered his gaze slightly, no longer certain where to stand, no longer certain what his role was in a moment that had outgrown him. The associate near the counter placed her hand lightly on the edge of the tablet, grounding herself as the weight of the situation settled fully. Danielle's eyes moved across the room one last time, taking in every detail, every face, every shift in posture. Not with judgment, with understanding. This was never about one store, one manager, one moment. It was about something larger that had repeated itself quietly for years, until now. Her phone buzzed again, but she did not look at it immediately. She did not need to. She already knew what it would say. The process was complete. The decision had been made long before this moment. This was just where it became visible. Danielle's gaze returned to the manager, her expression calm, her presence steady, her voice carrying the kind of finality that does not need to be loud to be absolute. "You made your call," she said. "Now it is time for mine." No one told her to stop this time. The door opened, not with urgency, not with resistance, but with a quiet inevitability, like it had always been meant to. Danielle stepped inside without hesitation, her pace steady, her presence reshaping the room with every step. The polished floor reflected her movement, no longer separating her from the space, but confirming her place within it. The manager instinctively stepped back, not ordered, not instructed, just moved by something he could no longer control. The tablet in his hand lowered slightly, his grip loosening as the weight of what it displayed settled fully into his awareness. Danielle walked past the threshold and into the center of the store, her gaze sweeping across the room once more, not as an outsider observing, but as someone evaluating what now belonged to her. The silence followed her, stretching behind her steps like a shadow. No one greeted her. No one spoke. The entire room seemed to be waiting, not for permission, but for direction. She stopped just a few feet from the manager, close enough that the distance between them no longer held any meaning. "This is where you decided who belongs," she said calmly, her voice even, controlled, each word landing with deliberate precision. The manager swallowed, his earlier composure now replaced by something far less certain. "I did not know," he began, his voice lower, searching for footing that no longer existed. Danielle did not interrupt him, but she did not soften either. "That is the point," she replied. "You did not need to know." The statement settled into the space like a truth no one could argue with. Behind them, the young associate stood straighter, her eyes no longer uncertain, her posture aligned with the shift that had already taken place. The guard remained near the entrance, no longer positioned as a barrier, but as a witness. Danielle turned slightly, her attention moving beyond the manager, addressing the room without raising her voice. "Every person who walked through that door today was evaluated in seconds," she said. "Not by data, not by behavior, by assumption." The words moved through the store, reaching every corner, every listener, every silent observer who had watched the moment unfold. A customer near the display table lowered their phone slowly, no longer needing to record what had already become undeniable. Danielle turned back to the manager, her gaze steady, her tone unchanged. "You enforced a standard that was never written," she said. "And now it is." She reached into her coat once more, pulling out her phone, not to call, not to confirm, but to conclude. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice still calm, still measured. "This location is under full executive review." The manager's breath caught slightly, the words landing with a finality that required no explanation. Danielle held his gaze for one more second, not to intimidate, not to overpower, but to make something clear. "You did not fail because you were wrong," she said quietly. "You failed because you were certain." The room remained still, but the silence had changed. It was no longer tense. It was resolved. Danielle lowered her phone, her posture relaxed, her presence grounded, as if the storm had already passed, and what remained was clarity. "Now," she added softly, her voice carrying just enough to reach every ear in the room, "we begin fixing what you revealed." The shift did not end with her words. It spread, quiet at first, then undeniable. The manager stood still, the last fragments of his authority slipping away not because they were taken, but because they no longer had anywhere to stand. His shoulders lowered slightly, his posture adjusting without instruction, as if the room itself had rewritten his place within it. Around him, the staff began to move again, but not in the same way as before. The movements were slower, more deliberate, guided not by routine, but by awareness. The young associate stepped forward fully now, no longer positioned behind the counter, no longer waiting for direction that had lost its relevance. She stood closer to Danielle, not in alignment yet, but no longer in opposition. Danielle noticed, not with approval, not with reward, but with recognition. The kind that acknowledges when someone chooses to see. A customer near the entrance spoke quietly, almost to themselves, but the words carried. She never raised her voice. Another responded just as softly. She did not need to. The truth of that statement settled deeper than anything spoken aloud before. Danielle turned slightly, her gaze moving across the store, not scanning now, but assessing what remained after the shift. The polished displays, the carefully arranged merchandise, the brand identity that had been protected so fiercely just minutes ago. It all remained physically unchanged, yet something fundamental had been exposed beneath it. "This is how it happens," she said, her voice steady, not directed at one person, but at everyone present. Not with policies written down, but with decisions made in seconds. The manager lowered his eyes briefly, not in submission, but in the recognition of something he could not undo. Danielle's gaze returned to him, not harsh, not condemning, but clear. "You were not the exception," she continued. "You were the pattern." The words did not attack. They defined. The young associate inhaled slowly, her posture straightening further, as if understanding the weight of the moment meant stepping into it fully. The guard near the entrance shifted again, now standing neutral, no longer guarding anything, simply present as the reality unfolded around him. Danielle took a small step to the side, her presence no longer centered on confrontation, but on correction. "Effective immediately," she said, her tone unchanged. "All customer interaction protocols at this location are suspended pending review." The statement moved through the room like a reset. Not loud, not dramatic. Final. A quiet acknowledgement that what had been normal just minutes ago no longer applied. The manager nodded once, slowly, the motion almost automatic, but filled with the weight of what it meant. Danielle watched him for a moment longer, then shifted her attention to the staff as a whole. "Every person here will be reviewed," she said. "Not for what you did when it was easy, but for what you chose when it mattered." The words settled across the room, not as a threat, but as a standard newly defined. A customer near the display table straightened slightly, their expression thoughtful now, as if the moment had moved beyond observation into understanding. Danielle's voice softened just slightly, not losing strength, but gaining clarity. "Respect is not a policy," she said. "It is a decision." The statement did not echo. It did not need to. It stayed, anchored in the space, impossible to ignore. She took one final look around the store, the tension now replaced with something quieter, something more grounded. The storm had passed, but what it revealed would remain. And in that stillness, the room no longer felt the same. Because now, everyone inside knew exactly what had been there all along. The room did not return to normal. It recalibrated. What once felt like a place of quiet certainty now carried a different kind of awareness, one that moved through every employee, every customer, every corner of the space. Danielle stood at the center of it, not elevated, not distant, but grounded in a way that made everything around her feel sharper, more defined. The manager remained where he was, no longer trying to speak, no longer searching for control that had already passed beyond him. His role had changed, not by force, but by exposure. And that shift was irreversible. Danielle turned slightly, her gaze settling on the young associate who had stepped forward earlier, the one who chose to question instead of follow. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that exchange, something passed between them. Not approval, not validation, recognition of choice. "You saw something," Danielle said quietly, her tone steady, directed but not isolating. The associate nodded once, her voice soft but clear. It did not feel right. Danielle held that for a second, then responded, "That is where change begins." The words did not elevate her. They anchored her. Around them, the rest of the staff stood in silence, not out of fear, but out of reflection. The kind that does not come from being told what is wrong, but from seeing it unfold in real time. Danielle shifted her attention back to the room as a whole, her posture relaxed but intentional. "This is not about one decision," she said. "It is about the system that made it feel normal." The statement settled into the space with a weight that could not be dismissed. A customer near the back nodded slowly, as if the meaning had reached beyond the moment and into something personal. Danielle took a slow step forward, her voice remaining calm, but carrying further now. "From this point on, every interaction in this store will be documented, reviewed, and measured against one standard," she continued. "Not appearance, not assumption. Respect." The word lingered, not as a concept, but as a requirement. The manager finally lifted his head slightly, his expression no longer defensive, but reflective, as if the realization had fully arrived. Danielle noticed, but she did not pause for it. The moment was no longer about him. It had expanded beyond that. Access will be retrained, she added. Language will be redefined. And anyone who cannot align with that will not represent this brand. The clarity of her words left no space for interpretation, no room for negotiation. The structure had been reset, the expectations rewritten. The young associate straightened again, her earlier uncertainty replaced with something firmer, something rooted. Others followed, not in unison, but in quiet alignment, as if the room itself had shifted direction and they were choosing whether to move with it. Danielle let the silence return, but it was no longer heavy. It was purposeful. She reached into her coat once more, her phone in her hand, but she did not look at it. She did not need to. Everything that needed to happen had already begun. Her gaze moved one final time across the store, not searching, not questioning, but confirming. Then she spoke again, her voice softer now, but carrying the kind of finality that did not require volume. You do not fix this with an apology, she said. You fix it with change. The words settled, complete, leaving no space for anything else. And in that moment, the store was no longer what it had been. Not because it had been taken, but because it had finally been seen. The silence that followed was not empty. It was complete. Danielle stood still for a moment longer, letting the weight of everything that had just unfolded settle into the walls, into the people, into the space itself. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be emphasized. The truth had already done its work. Around her, the store no longer felt like a place built on quiet judgment. It felt like something exposed, something aware of itself in a way it had never been before. The manager remained where he stood, not frozen, not broken, but changed. The certainty that once defined him had been replaced with something far more difficult to hold on to. Understanding. He looked around the store, not as someone in control, but as someone seeing it for the first time without the filter he had always relied on. Danielle noticed, but she did not linger on it. The moment had moved beyond individuals. It had become something larger. She turned slowly toward the entrance, her steps measured, unhurried, her presence leaving an imprint that did not fade as she moved. The glass doors stood open now, not as a barrier, not as a checkpoint, but as something neutral, something that no longer decided who belonged. As she reached the threshold, she paused, just for a second, her gaze lifting slightly, not at anyone in particular, but at the space as a whole. This place did not need me to walk in, she said quietly. It needed to see itself. The words did not echo. They remained, anchored in the air, impossible to ignore. Behind her, no one spoke. Not because they were waiting, because they understood. Danielle stepped outside, the city air meeting her without resistance, without condition. The street moved as it always had, unaware of what had just shifted inside those walls. But inside, nothing was the same. The young associate took a slow breath, her posture steady, her eyes clearer now, as if she had stepped into something she could not step out of. The guard stood upright, no longer positioned between people, but beside a doorway that no longer needed guarding. The manager lowered his gaze once more, not in defeat, but in reflection, the kind that does not end when the moment does. Danielle continued forward, her steps calm, her expression unchanged, her presence no longer contained by the space she had just left. She did not look back. She did not need to, because what she had done was not about proving who she was. It was about revealing what had always been there. And as the doors behind her settled into stillness, one truth remained, clear and unshakable. She had not needed to raise her voice. She had not needed to demand respect. She had simply allowed the moment to unfold until the system exposed itself. And in doing so, she did not just change a store. She changed the standard it would never be able to ignore again.